Hello, and welcome to the Afro Mavericks. My name is Mapasikamura, and I'm here with my Jamie.
What do you do?
And we are discussing the topic: should politicians speak at civilian funerals?
Yeah, so let me jump in. I'm going to support politicians speaking at civilian funerals. And number one, I'm going to say that if you look at Enoch Mpianzi and the case there, once politicians get involved, there's a trade-off. And this is the trade-off that everyone agrees to. It's implied, but sometimes it's expressly outlined. What is the trade-off? They will seek social justice for you. Everybody knows that the fighters, for example, will be able to get you the kind of recourse that you need. That's a given. But if they're going to come and fight for you, they're going to use that platform to advance the political agenda of the EFF. And with Enoch, because he was from the DRC or Congo, so he's from the DRC, so this ties into the EFF platform around not having borders, around not asking for people's papers. So if they come and they speak at your event, it's a given that they are also going to push their own political agenda. But what you get in return is you get their political platform, they fight for you. That's number one. Number two, there's a historic precedent actually when you look at South Africa for people using funerals for political expression. And I don't think that particular history should necessarily die. So if you look at the ANC during apartheid times, UDF, people would speak at funerals and use them as political teaching points. And I think that's what is happening. Because what we must realize, and I should have said this earlier, is that some funerals and some deaths are political in nature. The death of this young man, for example, as a result of school negligence, captured the public imagination, the cover-up, all of those things. So when you look at it, I think that because of the political nature of the death, the historic precedent that already exists in South Africa, it's useful. Number three, I would say that sometimes the best moment to speak to people is when they are in a moment of grief, right? Because their emotions are where they need to be. Their moral framework is actually more realistic at a time when they are facing their own fragility as human beings, their own, demise, so to speak. A funeral is a very emotional and morally heavy space. So I think that if you are a political entity, you need to strike at the best moment, and sometimes the funeral is the best moment. So that's my case for why I think that it's justified for politicians to speak at civilian funerals. Yeah. What's your view? I think we have to say it. We're doing a debate. So this is not 100% our religious views. Don't hold us to this, but we want to put out the views for you.
Okay, I think politicians absolutely should not speak at civilian funerals because essentially, I think politicians are there to put forth a subjective political point and to further their agenda. I think that, funerals are a very sensitive place, but then politicians would then go there to further their base or to increase their constituency. At that time, you said, okay, no, fine, it's the best time to make a point where people are grieving, etc. But that's the time to celebrate someone's life, not essentially to push your own political agendas. And I think politicians, not just in the sense of them speaking at funerals, but also just in general using the deaths of civilians to further their own agendas. I'm thinking about the DA and using the Life Essay Demeni, people on billboards using that to essentially get votes. So it's trivializing the deaths of these people in the sense that at the end of the day, we are merely just trying to get vote. Although every single thing is political, I think political activists should be the ones at the forefront speaking on behalf of these people and drawing us to the political point, and not essentially politicians wanting to get more votes and gaining more ground.
All right, so let me ask you some questions, and you can ask me some questions.
Okay.
Obviously, politicians are there to push their agenda. That's what they do. Mm-hmm. What's wrong with them doing that at a political event?
I think it's completely insensitive. I think there's a time and place for everything. It's one thing to draw us to the political point the points that Ngozi was making in terms of, black people and apartheid spatial planning, how it disadvantaged black kids in terms of education. They'd have to go into the suburbs to get education, etc. But I think to then like the DA and say, look, this is exactly the reason why you should vote for us and not vote for the other guy because this is what they do. I think it's insensitive and it's not the right place to speak.
But isn't there a distinction between what the DA did, because the DA was not necessarily invited by those families to make those proclamations, but the Mbianzi family actually did invite the EFF, or they welcomed the EFF
They
involvement.
welcomed. We don't know if they invited them.
So let's go with welcome.
Let's go with welcome.
Let's go with welcome.
Yeah.
So they welcomed them. So what's the problem? If they welcome them knowing that this could be part of what happens.
I think 100% they expected that, but again, they're grieving. They're grieving. Yes, they're grieving. And at that point, they want justice done. And I think for me, at any cost, I would accept that help, even if it's from a politician. I'm now thinking about Senzo Meyiwa, their family, and going to AfriForum, regardless of their political ideology, although they're not a political party, but their political ideology, they're saying, look, it does not matter who these people are as long as I get justice. And I think politicians play at that, they take advantage and they gain ground just because. And I think it's insensitive.
But don't you think that those families know what the trade-off is? So they know
do.
They're desperate, but still they want to take part in a process that will give them justice, because the Mbianzi family did say their primary objective is to get justice. So if they view the EFF, and everyone knows that the EFF will make enough noise publicly, but also will be able to get you a very solid legal team. Historically, they're able to get Advocate Ngwai Toby, Advocate Dadim Mpofu, and those individuals have done relatively well to fight for social. There you go.
On Twitter.
So isn't that a good trade-off?
I don't think it's necessarily.
Or isn't that a rational trade-off that they make?
I think it's rational on their part, but the fact that you will forever have to pledge allegiance to this political party is another problem. You look at the case of Fifi Cooper after they came to her rescue. Now she's always wearing that beret. She's EFF for life just because. And it doesn't necessarily mean that she agrees with the ideology of the EFF. And that's my main problem here, is that they come there to present their own ideology, to further their own agenda, to make it a political playground. Whereas now I might not necessarily agree with what you're saying ideologically, and that might not be the perfect place to turn people to listen to you.
So here's a question I have for you, and I think also for the people at home, is can you not do both? Can you not be both sensitive to the moment that someone has died and that they died in a wrongful and negligent manner, while still putting across the broader point that, for instance, in this case, we need to change our perspective on African, fellow Africans, so to speak.
110% you can. However, my problem is politicians. And the fact that they come in with this thing hanging over their heads that, look, but there's this ideology and there's this trade-off that you need to make. I think activists should be at funerals and be making those political points. I don't think politicians are that right.
But some activists are politically affiliated. Well, what's the difference between Lady Chira speaking at that funeral and Buyiseni Ndlozi, because she's an activist, but now she's also involved.
I think
in the party
activists
structures.
who are not affiliated with certain political parties. I'm now thinking of Musi Maimane right now and his movement and him being an activist.
Yeah.
That would have been the perfect person to come and speak on behalf.
Also because he's a pastor, maybe.
Yes, that's another point. But the fact that he is now an activist, not affiliated with any political party, I'm like, all of a sudden I am Jamnandas and I've lost my memory in terms of certain things. But yeah, I think he would have been the perfect person to just drive a certain point home without us affiliating that person with political party XYZ.
All right. Okay. So let me make my closing statements, and then you'll make yours, and then we'll leave it to the public to decide. This is ultimately up to you. It's your opinion. Please take part in the comments. But I think what I want to say is that, notwithstanding everything that you've said, I do appreciate that sometimes it can become a distraction from the actual memorialization of the person in question, because now all of these political issues are being raised. But I do think that it can raise the profile of that person, especially if they died like a wrongful death. You know, nobody, if I were to die, if I were to die through a negligent act, I don't want to be buried without that having the significant social attention. So if I have to share that platform with a political message, I would be comfortable with doing it because I now know that I'm going to get justice long term. I also think that if the politicians are welcomed by whoever into that particular space, I think that makes it fine for them to then opine politically on the issue. So I don't have a problem with it. I do think sometimes it gets too much. Like I was looking at who was it who recently had a memorial? ANC guy. Who's it, man?
Our producer will remember.
Stalwart guy. So everyone was speaking at his memorial recently.
But that's another thing.
But then they were not talking about 4IRA, and they were talking about things that were not relevant to his Ben Turok. Is it Ben Turok?
I'm not
Professor
sure.
Turok. It could be. I'm not 100%, but it could be Turok.
Yeah.
Now everyone is now talking about things that had no relevance to Turok's life. I think I was listening to some of the ANC politicians who were speaking there. They were talking about 4IR, and I was like, how does this apply to the moment?
Yeah.
But I think when you have politicians speaking at civilian funerals, and the issues that they raise are related to that particular civilian, I think it's fair game.
Okay.
Your go.
I think politicians speaking at other politicians or states, women and men's funerals, that's one thing. Absolutely, we want, people from the EFF and from the ANC to speak at Mama Winnie's funeral, to speak about her political identity, her political ideology.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But in the form of a funeral of a civilian, I think it takes away from the sensitivity of it. I think they come and turn it into a political circus. Everything is political, like I said. But I think civil servants should be, the civil society should be coming and speaking. I think activists who are not affiliated with any political party should be coming and speaking, and not politicians who are merely there for their own personal gain agenda, very subjective, not really caring about the actual person, their memory, celebrating their life. So I think it takes away from that sensitivity. If you want to make noise about what was wrong politically with that situation, make it in parliament. Make it in parliament, support them, offer them legal services, get your advocate, Mugai Tobe, get Dalimbo, we don't care. But at a funeral, it's too sensitive, and we're just trying to remember this person. And although you want to draw, we should absolutely draw to what's been done wrong to them, but just not politicians, because they've got an agenda, very subjective opinion.
Well, we're going to leave it there. Tell us what you think in the comments. We're more than happy to have this conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to share this widely. This is an experiment, the Afro Mavs. We're still very early in the history of the show. 20 years from now, we're going to be looking back, saying it all started back in 2020, February, with that episode. So be part of this great story. Till the next one, peace.